Hi everybody, my name is Aaron Thomas and I'm the Marketing Director here at Start.ca, and joined with me is Peter Rocca, the CEO of Start.ca. How are you, Peter?
Doing well, yourself?
Doing great, thank you. We've got a phenomenal show where you, the audience at home, have the opportunity to ask the CEO of a large telecom any question you have, and it can relate to internet, technology, any one of those great things. So we're going to get right to it because we have a ton of questions. That's good with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Exciting.
Let's get into this. So Jeff Jensen writes in, what do you think of the internet infrastructure in Canada, and if anything, what would you do to improve that infrastructure?
That's a great question. Canada's a big place. There's a lot of areas that have really, really good internet connectivity, and some areas that have not so good internet connectivity. There's a lot of rural areas that are, still connected by dial-up or satellite. And there's some programs that I think are trying to address that have come out. We've got Connecting Canadians, and another recent one which is through SWIFT. I'm trying to remember the name right now, but programs where they're trying to infuse some money into those rural areas and expand those. And then you've got a lot of high density areas which have some pretty decent internet. One of the things that makes Canada a little bit provides that competition on that internet is that we have a regulated industry that kind of allows third parties to interconnect to kind of provide competition for the consumer without having to put down three companies that are all connecting the same home with the same type of technology.
Good point.
As for what I would do to improve it, there's I think there's a lot of money that still needs to go, or a lot of effort that still needs to go into some of the rural and underserved areas. I know that, for example, we're trying to bring fiber technology to downtown London, and while it's not a rural area, there's pockets, especially for businesses, that are on very old DSL type technology that doesn't suit their needs. So I think that you're finding in a lot of these areas, there's a lot of providers that are trying to improve the service in some of those pockets or niches of areas.
Yeah, and to your point, the infrastructure, if it's not already there, you got to get it there. And in some of these areas, like in London, or where there's quite large areas in population, it's hard to dig up the roads and relay new infrastructure down just off of.
Yeah, it still needs to be done, though. That's the thing. I mean, fiber is obviously the end game for infrastructure, and eventually every home in Canada needs to be connected by fiber.
Yeah, look forward to that myself. I got another great question from Facebook, and this one is about a recent ruling in the United States. So we've got actually three questions. So Michael McGrath asked this, and I'm going to mix these up, Brian Raymond and Mike Parker. So let's go into these questions. What are your thoughts on President Trump's ruling this past week on selling customers' personal information?
Yeah, that's a terrible one, eh? No, it's absolutely the wrong direction. I mean, the internet was founded on open technology and had that mission right from the start. And certainly there's been the commercialization of the internet as every business has gone online. But for this one, it's really a little bit of dirty pool, in my opinion. You're not just talking about an ISP being able to sell your habits, knowing that you've gone to a bunch of sites and selling that to an advertiser, but they can actually interject mainstream. So they could, for example, say you were going to be shopping for a car. Not only would they, let me step back. So for a while, marketers have known that if you search for, Ford, that maybe they should show you, an ad for a Honda, or Honda might want to buy an ad. But people kind of learn to expect that. That is something that is very obvious. They've done a search or gone to a site, and therefore they're going to see something related to the site that they've gone to. But this would actually allow the ISP, without you even necessarily searching for it, to redirect you, or to say pop up an ad for something else. So you could just be going to the Ford website, and they could actually determine that, change the DNS, or do an injection in your stream that would actually cause a browser to pop or to go to a competitor's site. And this can happen very subtly without the consumer actually making that conscious decision to be looking for something. And to me, that's it's a really slippery slope.
Yeah, I mean, it could lead to things like using Google Maps driving home, and then all of a sudden, based on your history, you should stop here and eat at this restaurant because we've seen the fact that you've searched for this in the past, or a certain burger. I mean, it's taking the world of SEO and basically giving it in the hands of monopolizing it for the internet provider, giving it to other vendors.
Well, there's a little bit of a difference there. So in that example with the Google Maps, the consumers actually made that choice that I want to use Google to kind of help me with that commute or whatever. And you have privacy settings that you can choose. Do you want to track what kind of restaurants I like, and and then it can make those recommendations. So these are more of a recommendation. But an example would be that you have this relationship with Google, let's say, but now your cell phone provider, who's not in the mix at all, happens to notice that that you're using Google Maps, and it could redirect it or say that, hey, here's a different map service, or it could interject and say, here's some other service that you might want another restaurant, and it's never really had a relationship with you in terms of that privacy setting. Wow. So this is it's really more subverted than that expectation.
So when you explain it like that, it does become quite scary.
It is.
Yeah. So to speak on Mike Parker's question, to follow up with that, do you feel like there is a market for smaller ISPs in Canada to offer privacy as a selling point versus the corporate competition?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'd want to monetize privacy. I would kind of hope that we would be able to provide that expectation of privacy without expecting people to pay us for it. You don't have to pay us not to sell your information, for example. So it might be an opportunity for ISPs to let consumers know that they're not engaged in these kind of processes, and that might be obviously help consumers make a choice about what provider that they would choose.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a very slippery slope. We've a ton of questions for TV, and I narrowed it down to just a couple of, one and a big comment here. So Michael McGrath asks, once again, when is TV coming, and what would the approximate cost be to a customer?
Two of the most popular questions I hear all the time. Especially with all my hockey buddies and stuff, who are always asking me when TV's coming. I don't think we're quite ready to we don't want to overpromise a date and then and not hit it. Things are progressing really well, and we're in the home stretch of being able to launch it. But we want to make sure that we do it right, and we want to make sure that the product has the start touch, and the start experience. So it's coming quickly, and we'll be competitively priced. And hopefully by the next time we do one of these start talks, we'll be able to share a little bit more information in regards to the launch and pricing.
Great, very excited for that. Tristan Young asks a very interesting question that I can't wait to get the answer on this.
Okay.
With the supply of IPv4 addresses being exhausted and IPv6 transitioning happening at a very slow pace, do you foresee any issues with the immediate or long-term future as Start continues to grow?
Yeah, great question. It's certainly a concern. A couple points to unpack that question maybe a little bit. One of them was about the adoption of IPv6, and it's actually growing. I think it's starting to pick up steam. Maybe I'll step back just a little bit for people who might not understand the difference.
Yeah, what is IPv4 versus IPv6?
Sure. So an IPv4 address, or what a lot of people just call an IP address, is a way of addressing an endpoint on the internet. So you can kind of think of it as like a street address, for example. If if you say that I live at 123 King Street, that would be your address. So here your IP address might be 1.2.3.4, and that would be your address. So people know how to get stuff to you, or data knows how to get to you. Conversely, if you were to send a package, you need to know where it's going to go to as well. So every other business would have an address. And so a packet, or let's say a package in this mail, if you're going to ship something, would have a from address and a to address, and that's how that package gets from point A to point B. So these addresses are numeric. They're called a dotted quad, and there's about 4 billion of them. So seemed like a really big number when it had been invented, or initially. But we have more than 4 billion people, and with the continued growth of the internet and mobile devices and many people being connected to more than one place, 4 billion IP is just not enough. So a number of years ago, I came up with a different standard, which is this IP version 6. And this IP version 6 has, I don't even remember how many numbers it is, like quinzippy zillion or something. Like it's a crazy number. Enough, I think there was an example that could number like every atom in the universe or something like that with a unique IP.
So it's pretty
there's a few
future-proof.
of them. There's a few of them, yeah.
It's future-proof.
So this new address space, unfortunately, is incompatible. It would be like giving someone your address in a completely different language. If you don't understand that language, then you wouldn't be able to get the package from point A to point B. So there's really these two different languages that are running, IPv4 and IPv6. And so unfortunately, you can't just say, hey, we have all these new addresses and we start using them. You need devices to be able to understand, these source and basically understand this other language. So this other language has been very slow to be adopted initially, but we're really seeing a lot of growth in the last year. For example, a lot of the popular sites that our watchers would go to, such as Google and Netflix and YouTube and all those types of sites would be accessible by IPv6, but the consumer would have to have an IPv6 address as well. And a lot of the equipment that people have is just not IPv6 compatible, and parts of the networks, some networks are not IPv6 compatible. So there's this period of time where we're going to have to run in both IPv4 and IPv6. Your equipment needs to know both languages, and then depending on what type of site you're trying to get to, which language you're going to use. So there'll be this demand or this need for quite some time still for IPv4 addresses to exist. It's kind of a chicken and an egg situation.
Kind of like with TV, with digital TV versus the analog signal and how they had to move forward.
Yeah, exactly. And in that case, there was different equipment that had to come into place, and different antennas and different all sorts of different things that happen. So yeah, very similar. So modems need to be changed, and routers need to be changed, and lots of stuff. So that's kind of a bit of a primer on IPv4 and IPv6. So the fact is that IPv4 will continue to be needed for a while. And unfortunately, it has run out. There's no more available free IP space for the most part that's available. So how do you continue to grow if you don't have that IPv4 space? So what's kind of created is a bit of a commercial market where people that maybe can transition to IPv6 already, so large websites that might be able to give up a lot of their old IPv4 addresses, or networks, specifically a lot of the cell phone networks in the US had a lot of IPv4 space. And as they transition to IPv6, they have IPv4 space that's available, and it kind of creates a demand where there's a marketplace for people to purchase IPv4 space. And the more expensive the IPv4 space is, the more is a catalyst to make the investments in replacing all that kind of stuff to get converted over to IPv6. So we've got a period of time, there's going to be many years where we still need to have both IPv4 and IPv6. But for us as an ISP, because we need to make sure that our consumers can get to both IPv4 and IPv6, and there'll be this period of where we have to run on what's called dual stack, or having these two languages. And so we'll need to continue to go to the marketplace to get some of that IPv4 until the time that comes that there's not enough sites out there that are on IPv4 anymore.
It's going to be demand, the supply and demand for those addresses.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And as the what called the eyeballs, or people that are using the internet to search websites, as they start to run out of IPv4 and people are only getting IPv6, then those last few websites that have been hanging on to IPv4, they'll need to transition, because otherwise they'll lose the viewers that are unable to access their site.
They won't be able to go to certain sites.
Exactly.
Interesting. A couple more questions. So from Blaine Robson, when sitting down with the large three telecoms in Canada, when you're at a table, what is the relationship like with a smaller ISP?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Depends what year you ask me. So we've been doing this a long time. We've gone through a lot of cycles where some of our vendors who also happen to be our competitors, it's sometimes a bit of a challenging market to work within. So over the time, we've seen some of the vendors have identified, independents as a good partner to work with in terms of bringing people onto their infrastructure, and there's times where they don't quite see it that way. So there's it's always an ongoing evolution of relationship, but I think we've seen definitely some positive gains in the last couple of years, especially. Some of them are better than others, and I'm not going to out them here on
There's
Start.ca.
ups and downs.
Yeah, absolutely.
With everybody, right?
But generally, we're headed in the right direction. I think, we've certainly improved relationships with the ones that we've worked with over the last couple of years. And while things might not be perfect, they're pretty much they're headed in the right direction. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And the fact too that we're under a regulatory environment where we have to work together.
Yes.
And so, like anything, you've got to find that good balance and a good relationship to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I give them credit. They've certainly have been working within that regulatory environment to there's been some improvements that have been happening from the CRTC, and we're seeing again progress from some of the ones that might have been dragging their heels a little bit in the past. Still some work to go, but you've got to work with what you got, and that's what we do.
Headed in the right direction, which is good.